Okay, good evening, good evening, good evening. Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome Guide Radio. I'm your host, Nelson E. Brown, and I want to thank you all again for tuning into another show. I'm very excited. We have two more shows for the remainder of the year. So today's show and next week's show, and then we are done and finished with we are finished with 2021, and I think it's still unbelievable to just see how the year has just flown by. So much has happened this year. It was still a stressful year for a lot of people. We've still been trying to navigate through the challenges that the pandemic has thrown at us. But this evening, I wanted to talk about a very, very difficult subject. I think that this is a conversation that is much needed, but I think that in the world of ideology, I think that it's a very controversial subject to speak about. But I think that when we think about it from a holistic approach, and when we think about this conversation, from the community's perspective, and when we look at it from the authorities and the law enforcement officers' perspective, I think that we can definitely bridge the gap and rebuild that relationship between law enforcement officers and the community. So this evening, we are going to have a conversation with Mr. Bill Joyner. He is an equity officer for the Baltimore City Police Department, and he's going to be speaking to us about his role as an equity officer for the city of Baltimore within the police department. And he's going to also give us details about his position as an equity officer, since a lot of people really don't understand what his role is in the BPD. He's definitely going to tell us about that, but we're also going to have a conversation about what it means to rebuild the trust and to rebuild the relationship between the police, or the law enforcement officers in general, and the community. So I think that this is a conversation that is much needed. So without further ado, I'm going to share with you guys some sources, some statistics that I've pulled from a lot of research that I've done about the criminal justice system and about policing and community outreach and how the relationship can be rebuilt. But first, I'm going to start off with some information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that talk about what police and detectives do. Now, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, it says that police officers protect lives and property. Detectives and criminal investigators gather facts and collect evidence of possible crimes. Now, in terms of the work environment, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, says that police and detective work can be physically demanding, stressful, and dangerous. Police and sheriff's patrol officers in transit and railroad police have some of the highest rates of injuries and illnesses of all occupations. Working around the clock in shifts is common. And when we talk about policing and when we talk about community outreach, I'm going to speak about it from 2 points of view. I'm going to speak about it from a police officer's point of view, and I'm also going to speak about it from the community's point of view. And again, we're going to have a conversation about how we can bridge the gap between both communities. And Mr. Bill Joyner is going to talk to us again about his role as an equity officer and how he makes an impact every day doing the work that he does for the community, because it's a tough job, it's a challenging job, but it's important, it's essential, especially in these days and time. So in terms of the job outlook, it says that the overall employment, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the overall employment of police and detectives is projected to grow 7% from 2020 to 2030, about as fast as the average for all occupations. It says that about 67,100 openings for police and detectives are projected each year on average over the decade. Most of those openings are expected to result from the need to replace workers who transfer to different occupations or exit the labor force, such as to retire. It says that the median wage, in terms of the pay, it says that the median annual wage for police and detectives in May of 2020 was approximately $67,290, which is equivalent to $32.35 per hour. And to sum up the duties of police officers, detectives, and criminal investigators, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it says that they all respond to emergency and non-emergency calls, patrol assigned areas, observe people and activities, conduct traffic stops and issue citations, search restricted access databases for vehicle or other records and warrants, obtain and serve warrants for arrests, searches, and other purposes. They use computers to check license information. They arrest people suspected of committing crimes, collect and secure evidence from crime scenes, observe the activities of suspects, write detailed reports and fill out forms, and prepare cases for legal proceedings and testify in court. So in terms of the job duties, the Bureau of Labor Statistics talks about how they differ by employer and function. But in general, it states that the police and detectives are required by law to write detailed reports and keep meticulous records, and that they must carry out law enforcement equipment such as handcuffs, guns, and radios. And they are also called agents or special agents who gather facts and collect evidence of crimes. In terms of how to become one, this website, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, talks about the education. And it talks about how federal agencies such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation may require prospective detectives and investigators to have a bachelor's degree. Police and detective applicants must have at least a high school diploma or equivalent, although some federal agencies and police departments may require that applicants have completed college coursework or a college degree. Many community colleges and four-year colleges and universities offer programs in law enforcement and criminal justice. And the knowledge of a foreign language is an asset in many federal agencies and geographical regions. And many applicants for entry-level police jobs have completed some college coursework, and a significant number are college graduates. And some common fields of degree include security and protective services and social science. Now, in terms of the training, it says that the candidates for law enforcement appointment usually attend a training academy before becoming a police officer, and the training includes classroom instruction in state and local laws and constitutional law, civil rights, and police ethics. Recruits also receiving training and supervised experience in subjects such as patrol, traffic control, firearm use, self-defense, first aid, and emergency response. Now, federal law enforcement agents undergo extensive training, usually at the U.S. Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia, or at a federal law enforcement training center. Now, other work experience in this occupation, it says that because they need experience in law enforcement, detectives typically begin their careers as police officers. Now, FBI special agent applicants must have at least 2 years of full-time work experience or 1 year of experience plus an advanced degree. In other words, a master's degree or higher. And in terms of us talking about the other experience, it states that some police departments have cadet programs for people interested in a career in law enforcement who do not yet meet age requirements for becoming an officer, and that these cadets do clerical work and attend classes until they reach the minimum age requirement and can apply for a position with the regular force. Military or police experience may be considered beneficial for prospective cadets, and the cadet candidates must be U.S. citizens, usually be at least 18 years old, have a driver's license, and meet specific physical qualifications. Applicants may have to pass physical exams of vision, hearing, strength, and agility, as well as written exams. Candidates typically go through a series of interviews and may be asked to take the polygraph, or in other words, a lie detector and drug tests, and felony convictions of that sort usually disqualify a candidate. And in terms of us talking about advancement in this field, we often think about how police officers usually become eligible for promotions after a probationary period. And promotions to corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, and captain are usually made according to scores on a written examination and on-the-job performance. In large departments, it states that an officer may be promoted to detective or to specialize in one type of police work, such as working with juveniles. And that's just an example that they give. Along with exam and performance scores, a bachelor's degree may be required for advancement to positions of lieutenant or higher rank. And I think that one of the details that I think is the most important when we do talk about what is required to become a police officer, I think that we have to think about all of the important qualities that coincide with that. So one of those qualities are communication skills. So it says the police and detectives must be able to speak with people, and they must be able to express details in writing about an incident. And empathy. And empathy is a quality that is listed here. And it says that police officers need to understand the perspectives of a variety of people in their jurisdiction and be willing to help the public. Good judgment is an important quality according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics on the federal level. It says that the police and detectives must be able to determine the best way to solve an array of problems. Leadership skills, again, that's listed as another quality. It says that police officers must be comfortable with being a highly visible member of their community as the public looks to them for help in their emergencies. Perceptiveness. Again, perceptiveness is another quality that's listed here. It says that officers and detectives, as well as warrants, must be able to anticipate people's reactions and understand why they act a certain way. Physical stamina. Officers and detectives must be in good physical shape, both to pass the required test for entry into the field and to keep up with the daily rigors of the job. And physical strength. Police officers must be strong enough to physically apprehend suspects and to assist people in precarious situations. Now, again, that was a lot of information that I just threw at you guys about what it means to become a police officer and detective, and in terms of what the job requirements are in order to be eligible for a career in that field and to even consider that field as a possibility. I just want to stop for a second and let you guys think about how our relationships are with the police nowadays. I mean, it's very, very complicated relationship between police officers, well, in law enforcement in general, and the police nowadays, because issues as it pertains to police brutality and gun violence, I think that that has definitely had a negative impact on the way we all perceive each other. So I think that the community, the village of people within each town, it doesn't even have to be just here in Baltimore, but also just around the world. I think that so many incidences and so many situations that involve police brutality and gun violence and assaults and just the breakdown of the relationship between the police and the community, I think that it needs to be repaired. But I think that a lot of people don't understand what the tools are and what the resources are. And a lot of people don't understand the work that is needed in order to make that happen. And I think that every social group is affected by these problems. So the Pew Research Center is the center that provides a lot of sources, a lot of facts about who's affected by these problems. So I did some digging, and for last year, the FBI released 2020 hate crime statistics, and it gives us an overview of what the stats for the hate crimes that happened within the United States to specific social groups or ethnic groups or people who identify with certain races and with different social groups. It says that the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program serves as the national repository for crime data voluntarily collected and submitted by law enforcement. So its primary objective is to generate reliable information for use in law enforcement administration, operation, and management. Now, the 2020 hate crimes data that was submitted by 15,138 law enforcement agencies provided information about the offenses, the victims, offenders, and locations of hate crimes. And of all these agencies who submitted incident reports, there were 8,263 hate crime incidents involving 11,129 offenses. Again, this is a report, the 2020 hate crime statistics report. So all of these problems existed while they came about while the pandemic was here, but this has been a long and ongoing problem in terms of us talking about the breakdown and the relationship and the trust between the police and the community. But I can read more so that you all can get a better understanding of what is being conveyed. So it says that in terms of us talking about the victims of hate crime incidents, it says that 8,052 single bias incidents involved 11,126 victims. And in 211 incidents, a total of 346 victims were targeted because of more than one bias. And they created a pie chart for this report. And if you want to look at this report, just look up www.justice.gov, and then in the search engine, you can look at hate crimes and hate crime statistics to see this for yourself. But they created a pie chart of bias motivation categories for victims of single bias incidences last year. So this happened while the pandemic was here with us. And it stated that 61.8% of victims were victims of single bias incidences because of their race, ethnicity, or an ancestry. 20.0% were victims of single bias incidences last year because of their sexual orientation. 1.4% were victims of single bias incidents because of their disability. And 2.7% were because of their gender identity. 13.3% were because of their religion and who they were affiliated with in their faith. And 0.7% was because of their gender. Now, again, this is just an overview of all of the incidents, the hate crime incidents that occurred last year during the pandemic, and they updated every year. So these numbers are shifting and changing at any moment. So it says that of all of the known offenders and of the 6,780 known offenders, it says that 55.1% were white, 21.2% were Black or African American, 15.7% had a race that was considered to be unknown, and other races accounted for the remaining known offenders. And of the 6,169 known offenders for whom ethnicity was reported, it said that 39.3% were non-Hispanic or Latino, and 10.2% were, while 2.4% were in a group of multiple ethnicities, while the ethnicity was unknown for 48.1% of them. But 89.1% were 18 years of age or older out of the 6,264 known offenders where the ages were known. And among the offenses by crime category, we have to think about this. Again, this is I'm just giving you all just a general overview of what it's like and what is reported each and every year when our law enforcement officers go out and do their jobs, and when we are all in a position where we call on our police officers for assistance, and when we reach out to them for safety and security, when we want to find solutions to the problems that come our way. And among the 11,129 hate crime offenses that were reported, 69.6% were crimes against people, 28.2% of crimes were against property, and 2.2% were against society. And the location type, in terms of the location type when we talk about this, law enforcement, again, this justice.gov says that law enforcement agencies may specify the location of offense within a hate crime incident as one of 46 location designations. It says that out of most hate crime incidents, 28.9% occurred in or near residences, homes, and it says that 19.9% occurred on highways, roads, alleys, streets, and sidewalks. It says that 6.5% happened in parking lots, drop lots, or garages. 4.2% occurred at schools and colleges, and 3.6% occurred at parks and playgrounds, while 3.4% took place in churches, synagogues, temples, and mosques. The location was reported as other or unknown within 8.6% of hate crime incidents. And the remaining 24.8% of hate crime incidents took place at other or multiple locations. So again, I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys, but I just wanted to give you all, again, an overview of what it looks like when our community reports incidents to our law enforcement officers that we do trust and that we're supposed to trust, and we're supposed to put our faith in, and who we are supposed to feel safe around and secure around. I think that the question, when we look at all of the problems within all of our communities, and when we think about the fractured relationship between law enforcement and the community, I think that the number one question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, when did this begin? Where did this breakdown happen? When did it happen? And how can we fix it? Because a lot of the police officers and a lot of the law enforcement officers in general have been stigmatized because of all of the negativity that's perpetuated in the media about law enforcement officers and about the lack of trust that the community has in them. But I think that it's safe for us to say that not all police officers are bad, not all of them are ineffective, and not all of them are the same. We have really, really good law enforcement officers that are working every day and that are making the sacrifice for their community to make our community safer and more secure. But I think that it starts with us actually figuring out where the breakdown began so that we can figure out how to create solutions for the problems. I think that because of all of the events that have transpired in recent years, in the last several years, with gun violence and police brutality, I think that has created a distorted perception of our view of what law enforcement officers are supposed to be like. And some of us have forgotten about what their jobs are in terms of how we're supposed to feel safe and secure around them. I think that a lot of us have allowed the media and have allowed the stigmas of police officers and what the media says determine how we treat them. And I think that, again, it's safe to say that not all police officers are the same. There are police officers who are really, really great and who do get up every day and who make the sacrifices they need to make in order to keep their community safe. And again, rebuilding that trust is very, very difficult. I think that, again, when the trust is broken between people, and it doesn't even have to pertain to law enforcement officers or people who are supposed to demonstrate themselves as leaders. I think that it's very, very difficult for us to regain that trust when that trust is broken between between us and someone we love, or someone that we confide in or put our faith in. And it can be done. The relationship between the community and between the police officers and other law enforcement officers who are supposed to not only work, but protect and serve, it can be done. But the key is how. And that's what we're going to figure out during the second half of the show, because not all of us have all of the answers to all of these problems. We see what the problems are. They've been perpetuated over and over again by the media. But I think that a lot of people really don't know what goes on behind the scenes in terms of how much work it takes to train officers and equip officers for duty. It's a dangerous job. It's a special calling. It can be complicated at times, but I think that you making an impact for the good and being a role model and an example for your community that you do serve, I think that matters more. It's not always about the money. It's not always about how you can benefit from it, but it's also about the people that you serve. I think that the most passionate people who do the work that they do, I think that it stems from what's in here. So I think that what the heart desires and what the heart wants, I think that that's supposed to demonstrate itself and display itself to everyone. I think that the passion has to be there in order for anyone to want to spend their careers, fighting crime and being that hero, so to speak. Excuse me, that officer friendly that people used to look up to back in the day, back during my mom's age, during my mom's era, when she was in school and when she was growing up. I think that when we talk to our guests for the second half of the show, I think that we can have a better understanding of what goes on behind the scenes, because all of us don't know what goes on behind the scenes. A lot of people just go by what the media tells us, or because of what we read on social media, what we read in magazines, or what we read on the internet. But a lot of us don't really understand the work that's required in order to make this happen. Because again, it's not a challenge. It's a challenging job for everybody. It's a challenging job. It's not going to be easy. And I don't think it ever will be easy. But I think that it takes baby steps for us to rebuild that rapport that we have with police officers as a community. And I think that, again, it's possible. Anything is possible when we put in the work and when we stop believing everything that we read and everything that we listen to. I think that we just have to meet people for ourselves in order to figure out how to move forward, and in order to figure out how to create solutions to the problems that are here. I know that this is not supposed to be about politics. It's not about ideology. I think that it's more about ethics. I think that it's more about, it pertains to just doing the right thing. The late Maya Angelou said that it's always important to be a rainbow in someone else's cloud. And I decided to throw that in there because I think that when we talk about police officers and people in law enforcement who are hired to serve and protect, I think that, again, being that role model and being that representation of that officer friendly that a lot of our parents grew up loving and feeling safe around, having that passion for helping people and for making a difference in your community, I think that that is what matters more than any amount of money that you can make going through the ranks as an officer, or I think that matters more than all of the headlines that we see about the problems that stem from police brutality and from gun violence that is now even considered to be a public health crisis, depending on who you speak to. So since it's 6:30, so since he is right here in the waiting room, I'm going to bring Mr. Bill Joyner here with us. He's an equity officer for the Baltimore City Police Department. I also forgot to mention that he spoke to my class virtually at UMBC, and he's also a UMBC grad too. So I'm very excited to have him on. This is his first appearance on my show, but again, this is my first time talking about this topic on my show. So Mr. Joyner, thank you again for taking your time out to appear on my show. I really think that you definitely you stood out of all of the presenters who came and who spoke to our class virtually earlier this year. You stood out the most to me, so that's why I wanted to reach back out to you, and I wanted to book you for one of my shows because I thought that what you had shared was very impactful. So thanks again for your time.
That's really kind of you to say, Nelson. Thank you very much for allowing me to be on your show. It's always nice to meet other UMBC grads, especially ones that are making a real difference in their communities like you are doing here. And please call me Bill. No need to call me Mr. Joyner.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. So again, I know that you were in the waiting room and you listened to some of what I had shared. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know that I think that from my understanding and based upon what you shared with us earlier this year in class, so you majored in public health when you were at UMBC. It's called, it used to be called HAP. It's called public health now. But you had majored in public health, so you graduated from UMBC and then you pursued your education from there, and you were able to dive into different dimensions of the field that you've studied and what you've pursued. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you want to become an equity officer for Baltimore City? Because I don't think that they've ever really had someone who has acted in this role as an equity. I mean, I've never heard it. I mean, but they've never really had someone act in the role as an equity officer for the BPD. So could you tell everybody about that? Because a lot of people don't understand like what your job consists of.
Yeah, sure. So I'll begin with the first question about, who am I? Like, who is this guy and how did he get here? So my name is Bill Joyner, and so I am a almost lifelong resident of the state of Maryland, but I'm relatively new to Baltimore. I've only lived in Baltimore City for 10 years. I grew up in Southern Maryland and the DC suburbs, and sort of my life growing up I'm actually a member of many of the demographic groups that you mentioned as being disproportionately harmed by police misconduct and victims of violence. So people that are listening on the radio won't be able to tell this, maybe, but so I am Black. That you can see that if you're watching on social media. But so I am Black. I grew up in many periods of my life very poor, experienced homelessness as a kid a few times. I'm also gay, and I live in a high violence neighborhood in West Baltimore. And so all of those groups are ones that were identified by the Department of Justice as being disproportionately at risk of having their civil rights violated by the Baltimore Police Department. And that led to a court order to address those systemic deficiencies. It's called a consent decree to address those civil rights violations that were the cause of that were caused by systemic deficiencies in BPD's policies, trainings, supervision, accountability, and disciplinary processes. And so to get to that job, as you mentioned, I went to UMBC's undergrad, and I studied health administration and public policy and had a slew of minors and studied lots of things because I didn't really know what I wanted to study. When I was in college, I felt this great pressure, between the ages of 18 and 22 to figure out what I was supposed to do with the rest of my life so that I could get the skills necessary to do that in that 4-year span in college. But unfortunately, I never really found that out when I was there. I actually spent 5 years in college because I needed more time. I felt like I was not ready to launch, if you will. I hadn't found that, mix of things that I was interested in and was good at. And so I graduated with that degree because my family was just like, we're not paying for any more school. You need to graduate with it, whatever you have the most credits in right now. So that was HAP. And I then went to work for a university in Baltimore because I knew I needed to go to grad school, but I didn't know for what yet. And I knew that the University of Maryland, Baltimore would pay for my schooling because that's what they do for all of their employees. And so I went to work, and then I got some mentoring and coaching for people that I knew and trusted. And they said that you are really good at community organizing. And so they just said, figure out what you want to organize around, and maybe that's something you can do. And at the time, I was really passionate about increasing stability for kids to have access to education in a stable environment, even if they experienced homelessness. Because, like I said, I experienced homelessness as a kid, and my family, especially my mother, made extraordinary sacrifices so that even though we were very poor at some points of my childhood, she wanted to make sure that we went to good schools. And, just sacrifices that no person should have to make were made so that I could have those opportunities. And I didn't want to have kids have to have their families go through that to get the same level of education that I got. So I wanted to be a school social worker that will create supportive housing programs for kids experiencing housing instability so they could stay in the same schools and get a good education. But when I went to grad school for that, I realized that there wasn't really a clear way to make sure that those types of programs to support kids in need, like kids like me, Black kids, poor kids, minorities, etc. Oftentimes, those types of programs to support those kinds of people, they're accountable to people who are nothing like those. They live in the suburbs, they are wealthy, they have not experienced those types of issues, but they're the ones who make the decisions about what gets done and how and for whom and when. So I tried to figure out, how can we make these supportive programs accountable to the people they actually serve, the families of the kids who would be in these programs, the parents of the students that will be in the schools, etc. And that took me down this rabbit hole in grad school when I was studying, of figuring out, how to build the kind of power that allows you to hold social service organizations, public service organizations accountable to you, and landed on its economic power. You have to be able to have the resources to leverage over those organizations and those agencies to hold them accountable. And so I tried to figure out, so how can I help build economic power in poor minority communities like the one I live in West Baltimore? And so then I went to work, I graduated, and I went to the university to apply some of the research that I did about how to do that, helping women and people of color and immigrants start and grow their businesses using money from anchor institutions, so universities, hospitals, local government, that kind of thing. So I did economic inclusion, really trying to help people build wealth at the individual and community levels through procurement and real property development and workforce development. And then I felt like I was kind of stuck. Like, my boss was really young. She was really nice, but she planned on staying in that job until her kids graduate from college, at least. And her youngest kid right now is like 1 year old. 1 year old. So a long time I would be stuck in that same level with no room to move up. And so I tried to figure out, well, what's the next step for me to be able to apply these skills that I've gotten through social work and through, I went to law school too. I don't know if I mentioned that. So I went to school for social work, I went to school for law. How can I apply these skills to an interest I have in building a more inclusive social environment in neighborhoods and a more inclusive economy, better and more equitable outcomes for people like me and people in different groups from me, but are still marginalized, immigrants, women, etc. So this opportunity at the Baltimore Police Department came up about reform and creating more equitable outcomes in public safety, which has a deep impact on communities like mine. And so I jumped at it, and that's how I landed at BPD.
Yes, yeah, that's very like you've been through a lot, but you've been able to accomplish so much like ever since you had graduated from UMBC. Because you talked about how like it was very very challenging for you to figure out what you wanted to pursue, but it seems like you're the jack of all trades because you've managed to attend, grad school, and you stated that you went to law school, so you were overqualified for this position, and this is a position, from my understanding, that they had never created for someone before. And is that what you said? Like they had
Yeah.
never they
So
had never had an equity officer work for the BPD, and the fact that you check all the boxes in terms of all of your requirements, and even with who you are, to stand out and give to serve your community and to give back. This is also about giving back and doing what you're passionate about. So you were able to take your experience from your childhood growing up, and in the circumstance that you grew up with, and then you were able to, you know, get your education, graduate from college, and make something out of it. And a lot of people, who right now who are in that bracket, a lot of people don't really understand how to move forward. And by you sharing your story and by you doing the work that you do, I think that a lot of people can learn from it and experience a lot out of it. So my next few questions, my next two questions are, what are some of the benefits and what are some of the challenges of your job, in terms of you being an equity officer? Because I know that, the BPD, has not, well, a lot of the people in the community have not been receptive to the BPD because of a lot of the events that have transpired over the years, for the last several years, and a lot of people, have a fractured within the community, within the city of Baltimore, and even like not even on a national level with law enforcement officers in general. A lot of people have a fractured relationship with the police and people that they're supposed to trust and have faith in, and and it discourages people from wanting to pursue careers in law and who want to invest in this line of work. It's very discouraging for a lot of people because of what they read and because of what they see on television and what's been perpetuated over and over again the last several years about the police, these stigmas about the police and, the law enforcement officers who are supposed to protect and serve. So, what are some of the benefits and what are some of the challenges of the work that you do, every day?
great question. So let me talk a little bit about what it is that I do. And so the job of an equity officer is broken up into three different buckets, at least here at BPD. I should also say that not every equity officer's job is the same, depending on the needs and the structure of the agency and jurisdiction that they're in. But so here in Baltimore, the equity officer's job is broken up into three different buckets. First, it is leading what's called equity assessment, which is a requirement by the Baltimore City Council to, on an annual basis, collect data about equity outcomes and the operation of BPD. So this is the internal stuff like our budget, our hiring, recruitment, discipline, attrition, that kind of stuff, and our interactions. So this is equity in our external stuff like stops, searches, and arrests, and civilian complaints, and that uses of force, that kind of thing. And then to develop a report that says to the city council, here's the status of equity in the BPD. Here are our strengths, here are our weaknesses, and here's what we're going to do to address some of the deficiencies that we have uncovered. So it's very analytical. It's a report, but it's a big effort because the BPD, as many people might know, is a $500 million enterprise with thousands of employees and millions of interactions on an annual basis. And the second bucket is related to the consent decree, which is that court-ordered agreement to address the Baltimore Police Department's pattern and practice of violating the constitutional rights of some Baltimore City communities. And some of those communities have their rights violated more than others: African Americans, Hispanic Americans, homeless people, people experiencing substance abuse disorder, queer people, etc. And so my job in that bucket related to that consent decree is to address issues related to fair and impartial policing. So making sure that policing is not discriminatory, one of the root sort of layers of that pattern and practice. And also things like community policing and engagement, making sure that the relationship between the community and the police is sufficiently integrated and healthy so that the community has the appropriate level of power over the police department and not the other way around, that the community produces the priorities and outcomes and strategies that the BPD implements as a servant of the public, not an overseer or occupier of the public. And then the third bucket of work is the development and implementation of proactive diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So if these sort of like consent decree and city council rules are the floor, like the minimum requirements of how to make BPD more equitable and fair, the proactive part in that third bucket is how do we set a national standard of how high you can go in being equitable and fair and diverse? How can we be the most diverse police agency in the state of Maryland, and then the country, and then the world? And how can we create a system where our outcomes are the model for every other law enforcement agency that, is anywhere? So that's looking at how do we improve outcomes for recruiting women and keeping them and promoting them up through the ranks so they're not all at the bottom level, and helping make sure that if you don't speak English but you are in Baltimore City, that there are officers who can meet your needs using the language that you speak. Or if you have a disability, that you can enjoy every public safety service Baltimore has to offer, even if you need a wheelchair or you are deaf or, pick a disability. So some of the benefits of that work is I get to see a really broad sort of spectrum of what humanity looks like and feels like in Baltimore City. Because part of my job is figuring out how do we meet the needs of every kind of person in the city through public safety. And also I get to help learn about people, because I need to help to make sure that relationships between people and between groups of people are healthy. And that requires a lot of learning about what are the needs and what are the strengths and what are the goals and aspirations of different individuals who lead communities and the larger communities that are involved and the agencies. Some of the challenges related to that work, that, as you mentioned earlier, there is very little trust between groups right now and between the community and city government as a whole, with the state government and federal government, but especially between the community and public safety organizations like the police. And so sometimes it's really hard to even get people to talk to each other, and you cannot resolve conflict if you don't communicate. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, is getting people to the first step of communicating in an honest and good faith way that allows the possibility of reconciliation and repair of trust.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for sharing all of that. And I think that definitely leads me into my next question, in terms of how can we rebuild the relationship between the police and between the community? Now, I know that that's an open-ended question that we could talk about all day. But in terms of, like you said, rebuilding that trust between the police and the community, in your role as an equity officer, how have you managed to do that, and what steps and what tools do you use in order to educate people about what you really do behind the scenes, because a lot of people don't really understand not just the work that you do, but a lot of people don't understand the work it takes in order to recruit these officers, to train these officers, how to budget, and how to invest into this process, because it's a process. It's a very complex job, and it requires you to do a lot. And a lot of people have a false belief that people who are in the public eye and who do serve in their roles as executives, and people who have a lot of authority or a lot of influence, they automatically assume that these people make decisions in terms of, this officer stays, this officer goes, this is what we're going to do with the money, and that's it. So a lot of people, for some reason, feel like it's operated like in the form of a dictatorship because of what they see on TV and what they read about and who makes the decisions. So how do you help people rebuild their trust with the police, within the community? How do you rebuild that relationship? Because I sometimes have a problem figuring out, like, when did the trust between the police officers and the community, when did that become fractured? Like, where did it all start? Because it's been a problem for several years, but where did it all begin, and how can we move forward? Because we've been in the cycle over and over again.
So that is a very complicated question. It's a good question. When did the mistrust begin? And, I would argue, because I think it's a very subjective sort of response, I would argue that mistrust between the public and law enforcement entities began as soon as law enforcement entities were created here in the US. I would say because of what is now known as policing is sort of like a relatively recent iteration of what were once established to be slave patrols in the South. So they were people who were essentially hired by one group of the public to enforce a caste system, keeping other groups down, in particular African Americans, and enforcing them as property, not as people. So they were not meant to be consumers of public safety. They were targets of public safety. So there was never a sense of trust between them and the police. And then in the North, they were also meant to protect. Law enforcement officers were meant primarily to protect property in ports. And so in Boston and New York, like, they were there to protect things like cargo and ships from being stolen or damaged. There was no protecting people. It was protecting property. And so for that reason, I don't know if there's ever been complete trust across the entire public and public safety, because there has never been a relationship where law enforcement was meant to protect and serve all. And even today, where you see who is protected by the police and who is enforced upon by the police, they're different groups still today. If you look at sort of, so for example, drug crime, like drug use is just about even across all demographic groups in the United States, but arrests for drug abuse are highly skewed towards minorities, Black, Latino people in the United States, and heavily skewed against white residents, even though those groups use drugs at the same rates. And then it goes off from there, right? They're arrested more frequently, they're investigated more frequently, they are more likely to go to jail, they're more likely to stay in jail longer, etc. So part one, I don't think there's ever really been deep trust between all the public and the police. the second part about what can we do to fix it, to me, the first part, and again, this is my personal opinion, this is not the position of all law enforcement, right? I'm just one guy who works at a law enforcement agency. The first thing we have to do is we have to, and this is us in law enforcement, the police, we have to acknowledge that we've done things wrong, right? If you have caused harm and you want to repair a relationship with the person that you have harmed, you can't do that without first telling the truth that, hey, I hurt you. And then the next part comes about, so I've acknowledged the harm that I've done. The next part is finding a way to repair the damage. That I've done harm, so now how do I fix the harm? Demonstrating your interest in repairing that harm, apologizing, of course, but then it takes the effort of working with that other person to figure out how you can do that. And that does take some, on the public side, this is where they come in, because the public has a choice as to, like, let's say, BPD, we've acknowledged we've done harm, and we say we want to get back, we want to do better for everyone. The public doesn't have to just take it and say, okay, you apologized, you said you did these things wrong, we're going to work with you to make things better. They can choose not to. Some jurisdictions have chosen to do that. They say, no, we think the police is over. We're going to abolish the police department, come up with something new. That's a choice that the public has. That choice has not worked for those jurisdictions. Almost all of those places that have decided to really defund or abolish their police departments have either rehired 70% plus of the same officers back into the public safety agency, or they've reversed course and said, we took some money away from you, now we're going to give you back even more than we took away. And so we would argue that a consent decree, so the public saying, we'll work with you, but we're going to hold you accountable for making real, substantial, and sustainable changes, meaning new resources, meeting our needs as determined by us, the public, and answering to us. I think that is a way that the community, they can play a role in repairing the relationship, is deciding if after the police have acknowledged the harm that we have done and have made good faith efforts to begin the process of repairing that harm with the community, it's then in the community's court to decide, well, are we going to listen? Are we going to engage and give them the opportunity to do so? And what are the rules of engagement? To what degree are we willing to work with them? How much leeway are we willing to give them? And what are the mechanisms of enforcing consequences if they don't repair the damage in a way that we expect? It's obviously a very complicated and long sort of process, but I think that's how it really begins.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for appearing on my show this evening. You gave a lot of great information, and I have learned about a lot of what you had stated because, like, I'm a sociology student, so I had the opportunity to learn about the caste system and a lot of things that you just described, and the history behind all of this. Really quickly, how can people get in contact with you if they want to learn more about how to invest into this line of work, or if they have any more questions and concerns about this? And what's your plan moving forward in terms of where do you see yourself?
If people have questions about getting involved in Baltimore police equity and reform, they can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. They can email us at equity@baltimorepolice.org. Or email me, bill.joyner @baltimorepolice.org. Where do I see myself in 5 to 10 years? I see myself working in public interest, trying to help improve the relationships and the outcomes between public institutions and organizations and the people that those public institutions serve. I hope to do that for 20, 30 plus years until I retire.
Yes, well, excellent. That sounds like an awesome plan. But again, thanks again for appearing on my show.
Yep.
I'm going to close the show out with a thought for the evening. But I'm going to let you go. But I just wanted to thank you again. You've shared a lot of great information. This was a very informative show. I learned a lot again from the second go around from when you spoke to us earlier this spring. So it was great.
Thanks for having me. Have a good night. Bye.
You too. All right. So that wraps up another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome Guide Radio. I'm glad you all had the opportunity to tune into this very difficult but much needed conversation about policing and how we can rebuild trust within the community and how we can, again, make this village. This is our village. This is our community of people. How we can build that trust, rebuild that trust because it's been fractured for so long. Next week on the Beauty in Us Radio, right here on Awesome God Radio, I'm going to have my final show of the evening, and I'm going to talk about many of the things that we should be thankful for as we close out 2021 and as we enter into 2022. So it's going to be a show where I reflect on a lot of the things that have happened throughout the course of the year, and it's just going to be a little chit chat, a conversation between you and I. Nothing too deep. It's going to be very laid back. I'm going to share with you all a lot of my plans that I have and a lot that I'm looking forward to for 2022. You guys know I'm an excellent planner, so I'll have a lot to share. But make sure that you all subscribe to Awesome God Radio on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all of the social media platforms that you can think of. And follow me at Nelson E. Brown and at Nelson Brown on all of the social media sites as well. Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch, you name it. We're on it. So thanks again. I hope you all enjoy your holiday season. Christmas is this Saturday. I'm so excited. I've watched all my Christmas movies except the Polar Express, but I've got that covered. I've scheduled my time to watch that. I've been playing Christmas music. I've been watching all the specials. Rudolph, Frosty, everybody. So again, I love you all. I hope you all continue to stay safe and stay healthy. I encourage you all to just, again, be vigilant and to put yourself and your safety first, because I see what's going on, and I want everyone to look their best, feel their best, and be their best. So take care.